Well, good evening and welcome to Tucker Carlson tonight. Most people were horrified, of course, by last week's assassination attempt on Republican members of Congress, which wounded 5 people and nearly killed House Majority Whip Steve Scalise. But most people apparently does not include some people, including New Jersey Democratic strategist Jim DeVine. After the shooting, DeVine tweeted this, quote, "We are in a war with selfish, foolish, and narcissistic rich people. Why is it a shock when things turn violent? Hashtag hunt Republican congressman." After many people objected, DeVine did not back down. He followed up by tweeting this, "I'm sorry if my hunt Republican congressman hashtag hurt the feelings of any GOP snowflakes, but you have not engaged in civil discourse," end quote. We invited Jim DeVine to come on the show, and remarkably, he agreed. He's brave, at least. Jim DeVine joins us tonight. So, Jim DeVine, under what circumstances is it morally acceptable to use violence for political ends?
It's never acceptable to use violence for political ends, except perhaps in the most extreme cases. I'd refer you to George Washington and those guys. The fact of the matter is we do with ballots in this country what they do with bullets elsewhere, and it is not uncommon in politics that we use the language of war. We talk about fierce rhetoric. We talk about crusades and so on. You were on a television program, and I don't know what your body count was when you were on Crossfire. I assume that there were no real casualties there. So it shouldn't be a surprise to anybody.
I mean, wait, stop. You know what? I want to have a reasonable conversation. I want to demagogue this. But in the hours after 5 people were shot, including the House Majority Whip, you sent out a tweet that said, hunt Republicans. I mean, it was clearly a reference to the assassination attempt against Congressman Scalise. It's hard to imagine how you could justify writing something like that.
In the immediate aftermath of the shooting at the Sandy Hook school, we've heard people say this is not the time to talk about gun violence. We've heard lots of things follow this. You know, this is a.
No, but that's not what you were saying. You were encouraging gun violence. Wait, hold on.
Absolutely
not.
You
were encouraging gun violence.
Absolutely not. I
you
never
mean?
encouraged
gun
violence, and I stated on my
what did you mean by that?
I don't
put down that
or
paper. I'm talking
those.
about you, not some other paper. I mean, please.
But this is what's been out there.
Put that down. I'm not interested in what other people.
We see stuff like this, and this is not an uncommon thing.
That's great, but we're not.
We saw.
So your excuse apparently is other people have done it. That's not an excuse. I'm here to ask you about something that you wrote, and why don't you explain it? Why did you write hunt Republicans?
Is that for too long, Republicans in this country have failed to distinguish the differences between politics and war. And a lot of Democrats have failed to see the similarities. So you guys either have to tone down the rhetoric or we have to step up. And I don't think there's anything.
I don't think
hunt Republicans.
There's nothing wrong with that.
Sarah Palin put the crosshairs on Congress. I'm just saying hunt Republicans instead of Democrats.
First of all, Sarah Palin didn't do that. A group affiliated with her did. And it's a difference between a metaphor and actually suggesting affirmatively go hunt Republicans after Republicans have just been shot.
She put up a boast about her Republican bullseyes.
What point are you making? That that's okay?
What I'm making the point is that after year after year after year of hearing the same kind of violent rhetoric from the right, the left has every reason to come forward and stand up. What I've learned in life is that when you're confronted with bullies, you have to fight fire with fire. You have to stand up to them.
But a guy just went and tried to assassinate Republican members of Congress.
And that was a terrible...
It just happened.
It was a terrible thing.
No, but
and one of my tweets, Tucker, said, it's too bad nobody did something before. And of course, Congressman Scalise was the guy that received
tweet, and of course
more
was
gun lobby
overshadowed
money
by
than
your
all but
suggestion
15 other members of the House.
Do you own a gun?
No.
Do you own a gun?
No, I said no.
Do you think that you should be able to pass a background check for a gun after tweeting something like that?
I don't see that this would disqualify me from passing a background check. But I would be happy to
someone, as a gun control advocate,
myself to a background check if I wanted to buy a gun.
No, but do you think you should be allowed, or anyone? Hold on, let me finish my question. Do you think someone who tweets the day after an attempted murder like this, hunt Republicans, basically cheering it on, that person, in this case you, ought to be allowed to have a firearm in this country?
Well, first of all, your interpretation that I'm cheering it on is not accurate. I specifically said that I don't condone or advocate violence. That was within seconds, and in another tweet that said hunt Republicans. This is a metaphorical use of the term.
I do condone violence.
It is,
but
no,
if you could just answer my question, do you think someone who tweets something like that?
Metaphorical term. I've recently heard a prominent Republican say, I don't have time for political correctness. And I'll tell you what, I will make the time for political correctness when we have Republicans that aren't talking over us.
But if we could just get back, if you could just answer my question really quick and then we move on to the next one. Do you think that someone who tweets a line such as hunt Republicans or hunt Democrats ought to be allowed to have a gun as a gun control advocate? That's my question to you. It's really simple. What's the answer?
Absolutely. I don't think that would, in and of itself, define them as a person who either broke
someone
the law
going on to social media and advocating violence in the wake of a shooting. That's not a red flag or anything. Okay.
It does not
you're not much of a gun
violence
control
in the wake
guy,
of a shooting.
Yeah, apparently not. So your point is that Republicans, I guess this is your point, are advocating violence, and you're proving this by holding up a poster from 5 years ago. And because they are, you say now Democrats should? Like, what is your point? Is that what you're saying?
I'm saying that Democrats have to be more aggressive in the face of political issues, in the face of the opposition. We have members of people, one of the persons who was on that field who spoke about how terrifying it was,
what does that mean?
Was Senator Rand Paul. Senator Rand Paul retweeted something from Andrew Napolitano that said the reason we have a Second Amendment is not so people could hunt deer, it's so that they could shoot at a tyrannical government.
So what's your point? That
my
he deserved
point,
it?
Tucker, is very simply, no, absolutely not. But my point is that when you put up obstacles to people voting, when you secretly plot in the Senate to repeal health care that's keeping 50,000 Americans alive, and you're otherwise erecting barriers to the democratic process where we have elections where the people that get the most votes don't win,
that you should be shot?
What happens is, no, but that is tyrannical government. That's the point.
It's understandable when you're shot?
It's the natural culmination.
Stop with the talking points. Just get to what you're saying. I want to know what you're saying. Are you saying it's understandable when someone might shoot you if you do that? It's the natural culmination of the argument that was made by Judge Napolitano and Senator Paul Rand. If Senator Paul Rand would like to sit down and have an hour, Rand Paul, if he would like to sit down and have an hour-long discussion, no, but hold on.
I'd be willing to show up and talk about it.
Okay.
My point is that enough is enough.
What is your point?
My point is enough is enough.
So,
if it's worked
so it's
for
time
the
to take up arms?
No, it is not about taking up arms. It is about coming together and fighting back.
Fighting back how?
Politically. Peacefully.
Then what is this about hunting
America?
and cheer? You know what? You're an unbalanced person, and I have to say, it's distressing that more Democrats haven't disavowed you.
Well,
I hope
you know what?
will.
I'm a perfectly balanced person.
You don't seem it. Twitter isn't the only place where people have been politicizing the shootings of last week. It also happened on television with MSNBC's Joy Reid finding a way to suggest that Steve Scalise deserved to be shot. Watch this.
Everybody is wishing the congressman well and hoping that he recovers. But Steve Scalise has a history that we've all been forced to sort of ignore. On race, he did come to leadership after some controversy over attending a white nationalist event, which he says he didn't know what it was. He also co-sponsored a bill to amend the Constitution to define marriages between a man and a woman. He voted for the House health care bill, which, as you said, would gut health care for millions of people, including 3 million children. And he co-sponsored a bill to repeal the ban on semi-automatic weapons. Are we required in a moral sense to put that aside at the moment?
Jessica Deloche is a Democratic strategist. Katie Pavlich is an editor at Town Hall. They join us both tonight. So, Jessica, if you could just parse that Joy Reid essay for me, if you would. He disagrees. She's basically saying he disagrees with me on gun control, on health care, on gay marriage, and he spoke to a group I don't like. Therefore, you know, should we feel bad about him being shot or not? That seems to be what she's saying.
Well, I think everything that Joy Reid decided to talk about wasn't very smart. It wasn't very opportune. I mean, if you think about what topics she brought up, how were any of those things relevant to what happened to Scalise? They weren't. I mean, this is a person who has had an attempt made on his life. He's nowhere near being okay, and yet we're having to have a conversation now about votes that he's made in the past. I mean, I don't even understand how any of that is relevant, and it's really unfortunate that that's the conversation that Joy Reid decided to have then.
Well, I don't think it was an accident, and I do see how it's relevant to Joy Reid and many people on the left, Katie. I think she's basically saying, look, this guy's disgusting, so, like, how upset should we be that he was shot? Maybe not so upset.
Well, first, I think it's important to point out that Joy Reid started her segment by saying, we wish the congressman well. I don't actually believe that. I think that she doesn't wish the congressman well. I think in terms of the issues that they're bringing up, this is a smear campaign. She essentially accused him of being a racist as he lays in a hospital bed, unable to defend himself, when the racism story has been thoroughly debunked, even by reporters who initially accused him of racism. Look, you had the Democrat on before this. This has now become a mainstream argument. As you said, it's disconcerting that more Democrats aren't condemning this. And look, I agree that we need some kind of civility, some kind of decency, but I would really appreciate it if the left would stop lecturing conservatives about civility, which is really just a way to shut them up, while they don't do the same and uphold their end of the deal.
Yeah, I don't even care about civility. I'm just worried about violence. Here's Scott Pelley, Jessica, describing the shooting of last week. Watch this.
It's time to ask whether the attack on the United States Congress yesterday was foreseeable, predictable, and to some degree self-inflicted. Too many leaders and political commentators who set an example for us to follow have led us into an abyss of violent rhetoric, which, it should be no surprise, has led to violence.
So 5 Republicans get shot, and Scott Pelley, who no longer, thank heaven, is in that chair, describes it as perhaps self-inflicted. What does that even mean?
Well, I think it's incredibly unfortunate. I mean, it's garbage rhetoric. That's not the conversation that we should be having right now. There are people who had an attempt made on their lives. Had someone not been there to stop that shooter, all of those people could have lost their lives. And this is a conversation that some people on the left have chosen to have, and I think all of it is bad. And I think that more people do need to stand up and say that it's bad. More people on the left do need to have that conversation. I don't think that 2 wrongs make a right. I don't think that this is the time for people to come forward and say, you know what, maybe we should just try things a different way since we've been too peaceful beforehand. No, that's not what's happening here. You have people who are taking advantage of a tragic situation, and they're doing it to score political points, and I think that's going to backfire on the Democratic Party. I think all of it is terrible.
Yeah.
Well, it could hurt the entire country, Katie. I mean, it's moving in that direction, it feels like.
Well, I would say the Democrats need to start making better arguments that aren't necessarily dehumanizing, but uphold their policies and talk about why what they believe in is going to be better for their constituencies, which they have far fewer of now. But in terms of how we move forward and the questions that have been asked and the issues that have been raised here, you know, this is a mainstream accusation that the left and the media, their friends in the media, have made. This is not something that is on the fringe anymore, and it just goes to show that the far left, all they want is to meet their end, and they'll use any means to get there, and in this case last week, it was violence.
This can't be all made about the far left.
Self-inflicted.
I mean,
that's
no, it's not, but I mean, in this case,
yeah, this is
self-inflicted. So we're out of time, but I mean, just imagine, you all are on TV a lot, imagine that script going through the layers of editors before it gets into a teleprompter and some hair hat reads it. Self-inflicted, really?
Well,
I mean, that's just totally insane.
How is it that Republicans are being blamed for this here? I mean, that is the big question.
Where's the
ultimate victim
president?
Jessica, Katie, I'm sorry, we're out of time. My
since he's been in office.
ate up key moments. Thank you. I'm sorry. We got to go. Thanks for both of you. President Trump lashed out last weekend against the witch hunt he says is targeting him for obstruction of justice. Up next, we'll talk to a Harvard law professor who agrees with Trump on basically nothing, but he does agree this investigation is essentially ridiculous. Plus, more terror attacks have hit London and Paris. Are they even a surprise anymore? We've got the latest information on what happened. We'll be right back. Well, the past 2 days have seen 2 more terror attacks in European capitals. In London, a van plowed into a crowd near a mosque in the neighborhood of Finsbury Park. 1 person died, at least 10 were injured. An eyewitness says suspect Darren Osborne spoke about wanting to kill Muslims. That's the 4th deadly terror attack in the city of London just this year. Meanwhile, in Paris, a man previously flagged as an Islamic extremist tried to attack security forces in the Champs-Élysées shopping district. He had an AK-47. Thankfully, he crashed his car and died before he hurt anyone. It's the 2nd attack this year in that part of Paris, following an incident in April where a supporter of ISIS murdered a police officer, you may remember. If it seems like terror is on the rise in Europe, you're not hallucinating. It is. A new report from Europol, which is a Europe-wide police organization, finds that the number of people arrested for terror-related activities doubled from 2014 through 2016. Now, of course, that's also the period during which Europe welcomed a huge number of migrants to the Middle East, with almost no vetting, but no doubt their leaders will say that had nothing to do with it, just a coincidence. Move along, nothing to see here. Meanwhile, President Trump has admitted he is under investigation for obstruction of justice. He has done so in the most Trump way possible. He's done it via Twitter. On Friday, the president tweeted this: "I'm being investigated for firing the FBI director by the man who told me to fire the FBI director. Witch hunt." He then tweeted on Sunday, "The Make America Great Again agenda is doing very well despite the distraction of a witch hunt. Many new jobs, high business enthusiasm, massive regulation cuts, 36 new legislative bills signed, great new SC justice and infrastructure healthcare tax cuts in works." President Trump clearly thinks this investigation is a lot of nonsense, and on that one point, Professor Alan Dershowitz of Harvard Law School seems to agree with him. Professor Dershowitz joins us tonight.
Well, thank you, and you're absolutely right.
Dershowitz.
I don't agree with President Trump on a great many
of
his agenda issues, and I'm a liberal Democrat who voted enthusiastically for Hillary Clinton, but I think I'm a person of principle, and I realize that what the Democrats are trying to do to President Trump is exactly what some Republican extremists tried to do to Hillary Clinton: lock her up, throw away the key. And the very people today who are pushing for Donald Trump to be investigated, indicted, impeached would be on the other side of the issue if the shoe were on the other foot, and if they were trying to expand the obstruction of justice statute or espionage statutes and apply it to a Democrat rather than a Republican. And I think we need a single standard of justice in this country, and I think both sides are trying to criminalize too much. If you disagree with people, throw them out of office. Don't elect them. But the idea of charging your enemies with political crimes is too prevalent on both sides of the political aisle.
What fascinates me about your position, because I know you and have for a while, is that it is purely principled. You're not saying this because you're supporting the president or flacking for him or anything like that. But can you be more specific? What are the charges that his opponents accuse him of that a president should not be prosecuted for, in your legal
Well, they're
view?
saying that he committed obstruction of justice by simply acting on his constitutional authority. He had the right to fire Comey. Comey acknowledged that. He had the right to tell Comey to stop investigating Flynn. Comey acknowledged that. So what is the obstruction of justice? If he had the constitutional power to do that, people compare it to Richard Nixon. But Richard Nixon told his staff to lie, probably destroyed tapes, and paid hush money or tried to pay hush money to witnesses. There's no allegations of any independent criminal conduct against President Trump. It's much more like what President Bush did when he pardoned Caspar Weinberger at a time when Weinberger was about to go on trial and might have pointed the finger of accusation at him. And nobody at that time really suggested that President Bush should be indicted for obstruction of justice or impeached. So this is selective injustice against a particular president who was unpopular with Democrats, and it's just not right.
So what do you think of the, I mean, given your position and given the fact that you are a law professor, presumably know the subject pretty well, how do you respond when you see the endless hours of poorly informed legal analysis on television suggesting sort of the opposite of what you just said?
Well, I comfort myself by knowing that almost all of these people, if not all of them, would be on exactly the opposite side, where the facts were exactly the same, but the shoe were on the other foot. So it's partisan politics. Look, every liberal and civil libertarian ought to be against expanding obstruction of justice. It's such a vague statute. And the people who want to go after Trump say, oh, if he had a corrupt motive. What does that mean? Do you really want the presidency to turn on a subjective definition of a corrupt motive rather than on objective evidence of bribery, lying, destroying evidence? So I think it's a protection, because my argument is, yesterday it was Hillary Clinton, today it's Donald Trump, tomorrow it could be you. You know, when Lavrenti Beria, the head of the KGB, met with Stalin, he said to Stalin, show me the man and I'll find you the crime. And that's what my friends, my liberal Democrat friends, are doing. They're falling all over themselves, trying to find a statute that they can expand and they can apply only to Donald Trump, and then they're going to bury the statute and try to put it back in its script. For example, there was a period of time when they wanted to get him under the Logan Act. The Logan Act hasn't been enforced since 1803. And there's a concept in law called desuetude. They wanted to resurrect it, apply it to Donald Trump, and then give it an honorable burial. But that's not the way the law works. The law works based on precedent. And what you do to Donald Trump today becomes a precedent and can be used against Democrats, independents, or anybody in the future. That's why all Americans who care about civil liberties, who care about constitutional rights, ought to be very concerned about the investigation that's being conducted in targeting Donald Trump, whether you like him or not.
I can't even imagine how many people must yell at you at dinner parties. I wish I was there.
Friends and relatives alike. It's really amazing. But I'm used to that. I had that when I made the same position about Richard Nixon, or I've made the same position about other people. I'm used to being yelled at from both sides. And, you know, tomorrow it'll be the Republicans who will be furious at me and the Democrats who will be supportive of me, because my principles will lead me to conclusions that help one side rather than the other. But I'm not doing it in order to help the Republicans by any means, or any more help the Democrats. I'm doing it because I care deeply about the Constitution and preserving a document that has served us well for over 225 years.
We agree with you, and when you're on the other side, we'll invite you back. Thanks a lot, Professor.
Thank you.
This is a rogue pariah regime. They're terrorists. They're brutal. There's no sense to anything here. They've crossed a line with my son Otto, and so it would be very difficult to look for a lesson here amongst this insanity.
That was an interview last week with Fred Warmbier at his house outside Cincinnati. We have a sad and final update to bring you on his son Otto. He is, of course, the American college student imprisoned for a year in North Korea. Otto died this afternoon in a hospital in Cincinnati, 6 days after his release. He was murdered by the North Korean regime. Otto's parents, Fred and Cindy Warmbier, released a statement. We want to read part of it to you. It says this: "It is our sad duty to report that our son Otto Warmbier has completed his journey home. It would be easy at a moment like this to focus on all that we lost, future time that won't be spent with a warm, engaging, brilliant young man whose curiosity and enthusiasm for life knew no bounds. But we chose to focus on the time we were given to be with this remarkable person. When Otto returned to Cincinnati late on June 13th, he was unable to speak, unable to see, unable to react, to hear verbal commands. He looked very uncomfortable, almost anguished. Although we would never hear his voice again, within a day, the countenance of his face changed. He was at peace. He was home, and we believe he could sense that. We thank everyone around the world who has kept him and our family in their thoughts and prayers. We are at peace and at home, too." Heartbreaking. They are good people, the Warmbiers. You can hear it in their words. It's real, and we feel for them deeply tonight. Well, President Trump delivered a statement on Otto's death condemning the North Korean regime. Here's part of what he said.
He spent a year and a half in North Korea. A lot of bad things happened, but at least we got him home to be with his parents. It's a brutal regime, and we'll be able to handle it.
Otto may have died this year, but his arrest in North Korea happened in the final year of the last administration. His death was, to some extent, a failure of Obama's foreign policy, and it was not the only one. Ben Collins is a U.S. Army Special Forces veteran, and he joins us tonight. So, Ben, you don't want to draw quick and easy lessons from these things that are unfair. On the other hand, you do sort of wonder, he spent an awful long time in captivity when the Obama State Department did, in effect, nothing other than lecture his parents for sending him to North Korea in the first place. Did that reflect the foreign policy objectives or priorities of the last administration?
Well, Tucker, I think so. I mean, the fact of the matter is, if there was anything that we could count on the Obama administration to do, it was to essentially certainly do nothing in the places that it mattered, and certainly go another way on the place in areas that, unfortunately made things worse. As you said, this is heartbreaking. We have to remember that there are still several Americans, I think 3 Americans, that are still in North Korea that are held captive. So, this administration is going to have to continue to fight to get our people home. It is a tough thing that we're trying to do with North Korea right now. But the Obama administration certainly didn't make it any easier by giving them a pass for 8 years.
Syria is an open wound that's been causing problems for a long time, more than 5 years now.
Certainly.
And now, all of a sudden, the United States, under the Trump administration, appears to be moving towards some kind of conflict with Russia over this. What exactly is our objective in Syria? How is this helping America's interests?
So, I mean, I think you do have to look back on certainly what the Obama administration did, and it was they took a situation that was already complex and just certainly made it worse. I mean, if you look at it, we first backed the Kurds in order to fight ISIS, and we were conducting, an air campaign. So we first backed the Kurds, but then essentially we were backing Saudi Arabia and what they were doing in Yemen, which irritated Iran. So we tried to appease Iran. We gave them a nuclear deal, which then ended up upsetting Israel. So then we just sold Israel a bunch of weapons as well. I mean, we've essentially kicked off an arms race, even worse. But the whole thing was so discombobulated, they were never able to actually say, what are the U.S. strategic interests in Syria? Here is what a feasible end state could be, and here's how we are going to accomplish it. So unfortunately, President Trump got stuck with this, but there is no easy way out at this stage. And as you say, we see that we just shot down a plane, a Syrian plane, that could almost as easy have been a Russian plane, and I'm concerned about where that might take us.
Yeah, there's an understatement of the evening. So let's just make it simple. I mean, I don't think anybody has confidence in the ability of any outside power, including ours, to construct a viable new government in Syria. So let's just start with our enemies. Who should we be most concerned about within the borders of Syria? Who's our primary enemy here?
Well, so to me, there's long-term and there's short-term, Tucker. And short-term, it's the jihadist threat that exists. Because every day that they are allowed to have territory, every day that they are allowed to legally tax their people, they're allowed to legally sell, gray market oil and make money and push their ideology, we see more and more attacks, and they are able to recruit more and more people to their cause. That is the short-term threat right now. I do think that the long-term threat to our strategic capability is going to be Russia in that region. President Obama backed us away from that role as the region power. Russia has stepped in, and that very well could minimize our ability for, certainly from everything from energy. But the bottom line is, all of that Obama administration policies, all of Hillary Clinton's policies, effectively just made the region worse. It funneled all that migrant problem into Europe, and we've seen the consequences of that. So we've got a big problem on our hands right now, and I think President Trump has, he's doing the best he can with what he gave us, or what he was left with so far.
God, I'm more confused than I've ever been. Ben, thanks a lot for that. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Tucker.
No, not by your explanation, by what's happening there. Well, from Korea to Syria to Libya, it seems like the Trump administration is facing challenges from every side, and a lot of them began under the last president. Charles Krauthammer will be here in a minute to help untangle what exactly is going on and where our real strategic interests lie. Plus, Dr. Mark Siegel will join us in the friend zone to talk about health care, something we know a lot more about today than we did last week. Stay tuned.
The world is a mess. I inherited a mess. Whether it's the Middle East, whether it's North Korea, whether it's so many other things, whether it's in our country, horrible trade deals, I inherited a mess.
That was President Trump last February criticizing the situation he inherited from President Obama. From Iraq to Libya to Syria, the U.S. is confronting crises that first blossomed during an earlier administration. Is the Trump administration fighting the last administration's wars, and is it making wise choices as it does so? Charles Krauthammer is an author and columnist. He joins us now to untangle the Gordian knot of foreign policy tonight. Charles, I'm legitimately confused. I thought that our main opponent there and everywhere was the Sunni extremist organization ISIS, and now I pick up the paper and see that we're shooting planes down from a government that is also fighting ISIS, that is representing the Shiites. And so is the main threat in Syria the Assad regime, or is it ISIS? Sincerely, I don't know.
Well, this is like the last year of the Second World War. We're all fighting the Nazis, but we know they're finished. And a lot of the maneuvering in that last year was between us and the Soviet side for what it would look like after the Nazis were finished. Right now, ISIS, which is the main enemy, is about to be driven out of Mosul, which will mean that Iraq has been cleared of them. And what's going on now is the encircling of Raqqa, their last stronghold. They're based in Syria. Within 6 months, probably a year, both of them will be gone. And everybody knows that. So what's going on right now in Syria is the maneuvering. The Iranians want to inherit the territory that's going to be lost by ISIS. They showed that by launching rockets today over Iraq into Syria, ostensibly at ISIS as retaliation for the terror attacks, but really a demonstration to Saudi Arabia, the Sunni Arabs, and everybody in the region of their reach. The Iranian objective is to inherit the territory of ISIS, which gives them control of the entire northern part of the Middle East, from Iran through Iraq, through Syria to the Mediterranean. The Persians have not had that in 2,000 years, and it is within their grasp. So the Russians, the Iranians, the Syrian regime are all on one side, and the maneuver is to make sure they get the territory that ISIS loses. Our interest is to make sure that doesn't happen. That's why we attacked the forces of Assad, who were hitting our allies on the ground, who are the Kurds, and there are these Syrian rebels who, together with the Kurds, are closing in on Raqqa. Our objective, you were asking earlier, what's our objective in the region? It is simple. We don't want to see Assad have a puppet regime which will be run by Iran and Russia in control of all of Syria. We don't want them to inherit the ISIS territory. We would like to see that held by pro-Western, pro-Saudi, Sunni forces. And that would mean one settlement would be that you get a rump regime in Damascus running the west side of Syria, essentially, whereas the middle of Syria is controlled by the rebels. That is a far more advantageous strategic ending to all this. This, I think, is pretty high-level chess.
Yeah, I mean, it's way too high level to be real, in my opinion. So the two sides will just some sort of kind of co-occupy the country and not continue a civil war. Why wouldn't they be at war with each other perpetually forever?
They might be, except that if Assad and the Russians decide the war is not winnable, Assad is a minority sect, very much hated in the area, maybe 10%, essentially affiliated with the Shiites, the Alawites. For it to control all of Syria perpetually is perpetual war. It's not in the Russian interest. The Russians might accept a settlement in which there is a de facto division of the country into ethnic enclaves, which would probably be, for the Syrian people and for us, the best outcome.
Boy, that is high level. Charles, thank you for that. I appreciate it.
My pleasure.
Well, you may have noticed I was gone last week, and my life unexpectedly intersected with that of Fox medical correspondent Dr. Mark Siegel. It was an amazing, super interesting experience, and I finished it grateful to him. He'll join us next in the Friend Zone so I can provide slobbery thanks.